Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are diving into one of the most fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying contradictions in all of American history. And I want you to think about this for a second. How does an agency that started out as literally just a completely powerless desk of borrowed agents evolve into the single most formidable domestic intelligence force on the entire planet? Well, it is a wild story. We're talking gangsters, spies, political blackmail, and this constant razor-thin balancing act between our safety and our freedom. Let's get right into it.
To do this, we're going to trace the pendulum of American power across four distinct eras: the birth of a shadow state, the Hoover Empire, terror and transformation, and finally, the modern FBI.
So, Part 1, Birth of a Shadow State, from 1908 to 1934.
You know, the evolution of the FBI was just incredibly rapid. Back in 1908, they had no badges, they had no guns, and they were literally laughed at by local police. It was kind of a joke. But then, crisis struck. In 1916, German saboteurs detonated 2,000 tons of explosives on Black Tom Island right in New York Harbor. Suddenly, the war felt very, very real. President Woodrow Wilson actually granted emergency war powers to arrest suspicious aliens without a trial. Fast forward just a little bit to the Great Depression, and the country is being absolutely terrorized by outlaws. Guys like John Dillinger who were robbing banks and just totally humiliating the local cops. When the Bureau finally tracked down and shot Dillinger dead outside a Chicago theater in 1934, man, the agency transformed practically overnight from a bureaucratic joke into this widely celebrated national police force. But we have to rewind slightly to 1919 because this is crucial. Following the Russian Revolution and a string of domestic bombings, a 24-year-old, yes, 24, J. Edgar Hoover masterminded what we now call the Palmer Raids. These were brutal, warrantless midnight raids. Agents were literally smashing into homes, dragging thousands of suspected radicals out into the streets just to be deported to Russia on a ship they nicknamed the Soviet Ark. Hoover cleverly leveraged this massive fear of a Bolshevik revolution to prove that the government could absolutely crush any movement it labeled a threat. It was, for sure, the very first real blueprint for how American civil liberties could just vanish overnight.
All right, moving on to Part 2, the Hoover Empire, spanning from 1939 to 1975.
So Hoover's power truly exploded during World War II. In 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt quietly sent this memo, marked for Hoover's eyes only. FDR essentially ordered him to index anyone who might potentially help Hitler. So what does the FBI do? They secretly begin wiretapping and indexing everyday citizens, which led directly to the creation of the custodial detention list. This moment officially birthed the modern domestic surveillance state. And get this, it all happened without any congressional approval whatsoever. None.
After World War II, the Cold War kicks off, right? And the stakes become quite literally apocalyptic. The FBI actually became the invisible shield between democracy and doomsday through something called the top-secret Venona project. The Bureau successfully decoded Soviet cables and uncovered a massive, sprawling spy ring inside the Manhattan Project, which was, the most guarded industrial project in human history. They caught physicists like Klaus Fuchs, who actually confessed to passing the exact atomic bomb designs straight to Stalin. So the FBI wasn't just catching bank robbers anymore. They were actively trying to prevent the end of the world.
But the sheer breadth of Hoover's surveillance during this time was honestly terrifying. I mean, Hoover survived 8 different presidents and 16 attorneys general. How? Because he gathered files on all of them. He made himself completely politically bulletproof. He held actual leverage over John F. Kennedy involving mob ties and mistresses. He directed the FBI to crush the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi, but then he turned around and wielded that exact same immense power against the civil rights movement. He was hiding microphones in Martin Luther King Jr.'s hotel rooms and using paid informants to target the Black Panther Party, which tragically led directly to the deadly police raid on Fred Hampton.
The relationship between President Lyndon B. Johnson and Hoover was famously and perfectly described as a marriage built on mutual fear. They supposedly hated each other's guts, but Johnson knew Hoover had files on everyone, and Hoover knew Johnson could give him the budget and the freedom he desperately wanted. So LBJ essentially just handed Hoover a blank check for total war on his enemies, and in return, Hoover provided him with the ultimate secret police.
But of course, Hoover's reign had to end eventually, which it did with his death in 1972. Soon after, the 1975 Church Committee finally dragged the FBI out into the light. Senators heard sworn testimony detailing decades of illegal wiretaps, mail opening, and these really dark, secret blackmail campaigns. In a panic, the Bureau quietly shredded thousands of files. But the damage was done. For the very first time in 50 years, the all-powerful FBI was fully exposed and briefly humbled, with its powers finally getting cut down to size by Congress.
Which brings us to Part 3, Terror and Transformation, 1980 to 2001.
The 1980s and 90s totally changed the game by ushering in the age of terrorism. This struck hard and exposed some really severe vulnerabilities within the agency. Because remember, the FBI was built from the ground up to catch bank robbers and Soviet spies. They weren't built to stop suicide bombers. From the Beirut truck bombing to the 1993 World Trade Center attack, and then the horrific homegrown terror of Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City in 1995, the Bureau found itself constantly playing catch-up against a totally new kind of enemy that was utilizing everyday objects as weapons of mass murder.
And all of this culminated in the tragic morning of September 11, 2001. According to the source material, the pieces to stop the hijackers were actually there. But the pre-9/11 FBI was completely broken into silos. Intelligence agents literally didn't talk to criminal agents. Headquarters didn't talk to the field offices. They just totally failed to connect the dots. But that total failure to prevent 9/11, it awoke a sleeping giant. The government immediately passed the Patriot Act, tearing down decades of legal walls. Congress essentially handed FBI Director Robert Mueller a blank check to forge this massive, intelligence-driven counterterrorism behemoth. They tripled the budget and built a colossal global surveillance net, a net that frankly reshaped the digital privacy of every single American listening to this today.
And that leads us to our final era, Part 4, the modern FBI 2016 to 2025.
Today, the modern FBI has become deeply, deeply entangled in American politics. Just look at the timeline. In 2016, Director James Comey's public statements about Hillary Clinton's emails sent absolute shockwaves through the election. Then he was fired by President Donald Trump in 2017, right in the middle of the investigation into Russian election interference. That whole situation led directly to Robert Mueller stepping in as special counsel. After that, Christopher Wray took over the agency, trying to steer the ship through years of just extreme political polarization. And skipping ahead to 2025, following Donald Trump's return to the presidency, Trump nominated loyalist Kash Patel to lead and refocus the Bureau, during which time former Director Comey actually found himself indicted by a grand jury. It has been a wildly turbulent decade.
Now, the sheer scale of the agency today is truly immense. 38,000. That is the staggering number of employees working for the FBI as of late 2025. They are operating with a massive $4.8 billion counterterrorism budget, and they are heavily utilizing advanced AI and data analytics. All of this makes the Bureau larger, richer, and far more centralized than at any point in its entire 117-year history.
So, what does this all mean? The absolute most crucial point to take away from this explainer is the relentless pendulum of power we've just tracked. The FBI is a massive contradiction. On one hand, it acts as the shield, right? It's America's immune system, fighting the disease, catching spies, and dismantling terrorist cells. We absolutely need that. But on the other hand, it has historically operated as the sword. A shadow state armed with almost godlike surveillance powers, often operating with extremely minimal accountability against the very citizens it is sworn to protect.
We're going to leave you with this final contradiction to ponder. No other nation on Earth has given one single agency so much power for so long. So the question is, in our quest to build the ultimate guardian of liberty, have we simply created the final judge of who actually gets to keep it? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep asking the hard questions.